Hello, my friend. Welcome to your sleep story. My name is Stephen Dalton. I'm an Irish storyteller, and it's my great privilege to be the voice that you listen to as you go to sleep tonight. Tonight I continue my incredibly dull history series, and as often is the case, I kind of disagree with the dull part of the title in this one. Tonight, we cover the history of dogs, and as you might know by now, I do love my dogs, Timmy and Frankie, and I'll let you into a secret. When I record my stories, I always record the intro at the end, and so I can reliably tell you that for the duration of this recording, Timmy and Frankie lay beside me, almost perfectly still. Tell me about your dogs in the comments. I love to hear from you. Okay, let's do the relaxation session, which will take a few minutes before tonight's sleep story. I'm going to count down from 10 to 1, and as I do, allow yourself to let go more and more. 10. Feel the support of the bed beneath you, or the floor, or whatever surface you lie on tonight. And beneath all of that, feel the support of the earth, that deep, grounding support, that constant support, that unchanging, reassuring support that comes from our home, the earth. And as you become aware of it, see if you can release a little more. Let go a little more. 9. Feel into your body now. Where are you still holding? Where do you feel tension? Perhaps you feel pain. Maybe it's in your toes or your feet. Maybe it's in your lower legs. Maybe your thighs or your belly. Maybe you're holding in your chest. Or maybe you're like me and you hold too much tension in your hands or your face. And as you lie here now, and as you become aware of this tension or holding on, notice the release that comes with awareness. Just let go now. 8. You are safe. Allow my voice to be a friend tonight, to be a gentle guide. Know that my voice will only ever take you to safe places. See if you can find the peace in that fact. See if you can find the trust. See if you can notice that when we feel safe, we can become curious, and we can feel a little light of joy within our hearts as we move closer and closer to sleep. 7. The day is done. Whatever has been, and whatever will be, will be. Whatever thoughts arrive with you tonight, just notice them for what they are. Thoughts, a part of being human, but not you. You are not your thoughts. You don't have to follow them. They don't have to lead your emotions. And so if and when they come, and they will, let them float away now, like leaves on a moonlit river, or clouds passing by through a starlit sky. 6. This is your moment. This is your time. Allow that fact to enable you to settle in now, to feel cozy now, to feel the warmth and joy of the ability to just lie here and hear a cozy story. 5. Peace lives within you. It is always there. It is just waiting to be found, waiting to be felt. And so see if you can find that peace within you tonight. 4. Perhaps allow a little gratitude now. Gratitude for the simple things. The shelter you have tonight. The breath in your body. 3. Begin to engage with your imagination now. Begin to see the humble dog, a great friend of us humans, and be ready to be curious as you find out the history of one of our best friends. 2. Checking in with your body one more time now. Your body has worked hard for you today. It's time to give it rest. And 1. completely letting go now as I tell you tonight's sleep story. Part 1, in which wolves begin to make some questionable career moves. Long before dogs became the sort of animals who wear knitted jumpers and have Instagram accounts, they were wolves. Proper wolves, lean, wary, and completely uninterested in being petted. We're talking about a time at least 15,000 years ago, possibly much longer, when the earth was colder. People lived in small, mobile groups, and survival was a full-time occupation. Humans had no kennels, no tinned food, and no squeaky toys in the shape of Christmas puddings. Wolves, meanwhile, had no interest in learning sit or stay, and yet, in certain corners of the Ice Age world, these two species began to notice one another in a slightly less adversarial way. It's thought that some wolves began hanging around the outskirts of human camps, perhaps drawn by the smell of discarded bones or the promise of an easy meal. These were not the boldest wolves. The braver, more aggressive ones stayed deep in the wild, chasing their own prey. Instead, it may have been the more timid, slightly lazy wolves who lingered nearby, watching, waiting, calculating that it was easier to scavenge leftovers than risk breaking a tooth on a reindeer. The humans, for their part, didn't immediately shoo them away. Perhaps the wolves were useful in some small way, alerting the camp to danger, or just keeping it marginally cleaner by removing food scraps before they rotted. Over many generations, and we're talking many, because natural change moves about as quickly as an elderly dog deciding whether or not to get off the sofa, these camp loitering wolves began to change. They became less aggressive. Their features softened, and they grew more comfortable in the company of humans. This wasn't the sort of deliberate breeding we think of today, with carefully chosen pairs and records kept in leather-bound books. It was simply a case of the wolves who could tolerate people, producing more offspring near people, until eventually some of them weren't quite wolves anymore. And this is where the story becomes a little more tangible. Archaeologists have uncovered burial sites from around 14,000 years ago in places like Bonn Oberkassel, Germany, where a man, a woman, and a dog were laid to rest together. The dog's skeleton shows signs of care. It had suffered from canine distemper, a disease that would have killed it without human help, and yet it survived for weeks. Someone had fed it, kept it warm, and seen it through. Whether this was an act of affection, practicality, or both, we can't know for certain, but it marks one of the first clear points in history where the relationship between humans and dogs crossed from opportunistic into something more enduring. Still, to picture these early dogs as anything like the eager spaniels or dozy retrievers of today would be a mistake. They were likely rangy, unpredictable, and smelt strongly of whatever they'd last eaten. But they had crossed an invisible line. They were no longer wild, not entirely, and in the slow, plodding march of history, that was quite a significant development. Part 2, in which dogs wander into the first villages, mostly without an invitation. With the end of the Ice Age came the dawn of agriculture, an era when humans decided, in a fit of ambition, to stop wandering after herds and start coaxing plants out of the ground instead. Settled life meant grain stores, livestock pens, and permanent dwellings, all of which attracted more than just the local people. Dogs, or at least the descendants of those camp wolves, began turning up in these early villages, padding between mud brick houses, sniffing at drying fish racks, and generally inserting themselves into the daily business of farming life. For the villagers, dogs were a mixed blessing. On one hand, they kept pests at bay and sounded the alarm when strangers or predators approached. On the other, they were perfectly capable of stealing a side of goat meat or knocking over a basket of grain if nobody was looking. There are ancient Sumerian records that depict dogs in art, some tethered, some running free, suggesting that humans were already dividing them into helpful and needs watching. It's not hard to imagine some farmer in 7000 BCE muttering under his breath about the brown one that keeps sleeping in the wheat. Still, a bond was forming. Some of these dogs became regular companions, guarding flocks of sheep from wolves, ironic given their ancestry, and following their humans out into the fields. The early agriculturalists, no strangers to long, repetitive tasks, must have appreciated the quiet presence of a dog trotting alongside them. And so, without fanfare, dogs began their first real jobs, earning their keep in ways that would shape their reputation for the next few thousand years. Part 3, in which dogs arrive in the first great civilizations and try not to get in the way. By the time humans were building cities with gates and walls, dogs were already there, not at the planning meetings, but certainly sniffing around the construction sites. In Mesopotamia, dogs served as hunters, guards, and occasional companions. They appear on clay tablets, sometimes identified by name, not Fluffy or Biscuit, but rather names that translated to things like Biter or Reliable One, which tells you exactly what was expected of them. The ancient Egyptians, with their fondness for animals of all kinds, were happy to immortalize dogs in tomb paintings. Some pharaohs kept hunting hounds, lean and long-limbed, bred for chasing game through the reeds. One particularly adored dog received an elaborate burial with fine linen and incense, all recorded in hieroglyphics. It's unlikely this dog ever considered how fortunate he was in comparison to the average street dog in Thebes, but his place in history is secure nonetheless. Even so, the vast majority of ancient dogs were working animals. They guarded homes, herded livestock, and kept an eye on the grain stores, now and then. They probably trotted into temples, only to be ushered out again by priests who didn't want pawprints on the ceremonial floors. The bond between dog and human was growing, but nobody was yet making little beds for them by the hearth. That luxury was still a long way off. Part 4, in which the Greeks and Romans get involved, and things become slightly more organized. The Greeks, never short of opinions about the natural world, wrote about dogs with a mixture of practicality and occasional sentiment. Aristotle noted the different temperaments of breeds, some suited to chasing hares across the plains, others to guarding property or herding goats. These were not observations made in passing. They were careful records, the kind you make when you have both an interest in animals and the time to write about them while wearing a tunic. In Homer's Odyssey, we meet Argos, a loyal hound who waits 20 years for his master Odysseus to return, recognizes him instantly, and then promptly dies. The scene is moving, though it does suggest Argos might have been holding on for that moment alone. The Romans, with their love of order, took this interest in dogs to new heights. They bred dogs for specific purposes. Mastiffs for guarding estates, lean sighthounds for chasing deer, and small lapdogs for companionship. These were not haphazard arrangements. The Romans were as deliberate about breeding dogs as they were about building aqueducts. A villa in Pompeii still has a mosaic floor with the words Cave Canem, beware of the dog, beneath the image of a particularly alert-looking hound. Whether this was a genuine warning or a subtle joke for visitors is up for debate, but either way, it shows that the Romans liked the idea of a dog as a deterrent. Oh, and I realize I've never actually explained so far how people started breeding dogs on purpose. It didn't begin with Roman record keeping or Greek philosophy. It began thousands of years earlier, when humans noticed that certain dogs were better at certain things. A dog that could keep sheep together without nipping too hard was worth keeping around. A dog that barked when strangers approached, but didn't bark all night at nothing, was worth feeding. Over time, people began to pair those better dogs together, not out of science, but out of common sense. The result was the slow, subtle shaping of traits, stronger herding instincts here, a calmer temperament there. Long before anyone spoke of breeds, what the Romans did was take that instinctive process and give it structure, recording and refining it, so that particular types of dogs could be reproduced with relative predictability. Dogs accompanied Roman legions on campaigns, pulling supply carts or guarding encampments. In quieter times, dogs could be found in the homes of the wealthy, sleeping at the foot of a couch while their owners debated politics or recited poetry. The smaller breeds were particularly popular with Roman matrons, who might carry them about as symbols of refinement. Even so, the vast majority of dogs in the Roman world were working animals. They patrolled estates, kept watch over herds, and scavenged in the streets. A dog's value was tied to its utility, though affection certainly existed. Graffiti and inscriptions from the period reveal fond nicknames and laments for dogs that had died. The bond between human and dog was clearly strong enough to cross the centuries, though the dogs themselves would have been unaware they were participating in a civilization that people would later write essays about. Part 5, in which the Middle Ages arrive and dogs get fancy titles. After Rome's decline, Europe entered the medieval period, and with it came a shift in the way dogs were seen. Hunting was no longer just about putting food on the table. For the nobility, this was a display of power and status. Hunting dogs, especially greyhounds and hounds bred for scent tracking, became prized possessions, often given as gifts between rulers. The nobility might spend more on a prized hunting dog than on the wages of several peasants, which was fortunate for the dog, but probably less so for the peasants. Dogs also appear in medieval manuscripts, sometimes trotting alongside knights. sometimes curled at the feet of a lady in an illuminated margin. Lap dogs became fashionable in the courts, their main duty being to look decorative and perhaps keep their owners' hands warm in draughty castles. These small companions could be named in wills and given their own attendants. It was not unusual for a favourite lapdog to be dressed in a tiny embroidered coat, a detail that seems both charming and entirely impractical for an animal that might decide to roll in something unpleasant. Working dogs, meanwhile, kept to their traditional tasks. Shepherds relied on them to manage flocks. Farmers trusted them to guard yards and barns, and travellers valued their company on long journeys. In some towns, there were even laws about the keeping of dogs, who could own one, how they should be controlled, and what would happen if they damaged property. Disputes over livestock worrying were common enough to be recorded in local courts, and occasionally a dog would be mentioned by name in the proceedings, a small, slightly bewildered celebrity of the legal world. Monasteries sometimes kept dogs, though not always without controversy. There are records of monks being instructed to keep dogs out of cloisters to prevent disruption. One can imagine the scene, a solemn procession through the courtyard, only for a large hound to appear, tail wagging, carrying some unidentifiable object it had found. It was, after all, a period in which dogs still acted according to their instincts, regardless of human ceremony. Part 6, in which dogs take to the seas, whether they like it or not. When humans decided to cross oceans for months on end in wooden ships, dogs, as they often did, found themselves included in the plan without ever being consulted. On board, they were useful for keeping the rat population down, and a dog that was good at catching the rats became a valued member of the crew. Some explorers brought large dogs ashore to help with hunting in unfamiliar territories. The Spanish conquistadors famously brought mastiffs to the Americas, dogs so large and intimidating that they often caused as much alarm as the conquistadors themselves. These were not the sort of dogs you idly patted on the head, unless you were very sure of the outcome. Meanwhile, smaller dogs found their role as ship mascots, their duties consisting of sitting in comfortable spots looking hopeful at meal times, and occasionally getting underfoot at exactly the wrong moment. A ship's dog often became part of the crew's morale, which was important on long voyages where boredom could set in after the first few 100 miles of nothing but water. Some dogs became so accustomed to ship life they could navigate the deck in rough seas better than new sailors, though whether this was skill or simply a natural ability to stay low to the ground is open to debate. A few even made it into sailors' logbooks, their names and personalities recorded alongside weather reports and sightings of distant land. Many dogs adapted well to the sea, as dogs always seem to do. They adapted to the smell of tar and salt, the creak of timbers, and the occasional cannon fire. And while they probably had no concept of global exploration, they were, unwittingly, becoming some of the first dogs to set paw on entirely new continents. Part 7, in which the Renaissance brings dogs into portraits. The Renaissance, or Renaissance, depending on where you're from, that explosion of art, science, and generally showing off, also managed to include dogs. Not because dogs were contributing to scientific breakthroughs, but because they looked good in paintings. Wealthy patrons had themselves painted alongside their favorite hounds, the animals gazing nobly into the middle distance as if they had just thought of something profound. In truth, they were probably staring at the artist's lunch. Hunting remained a favored pastime of the elite, and hunting dogs became a status symbol in themselves. The collars alone could be works of art, embossed leather, brass fittings, and occasionally precious metals. This wasn't entirely for fashion. A sturdy collar could protect a dog's neck from injury, but there was no harm, apparently, in making it match the owner's belt. City life, meanwhile, saw a different sort of dog. In the winding streets of Florence or Venice, dogs scavenged scraps, lounged in sunny doorways, and occasionally followed strangers for no other reason than mild curiosity. These were the urban dogs of the Renaissance, not painted, not collared in gold, but every bit as adept at finding a comfortable place to sleep. Artists even slipped dogs into religious scenes, sometimes symbolic of loyalty, sometimes there simply because someone liked the look of them. The result is that a surprising number of masterpieces now double as early dog portraits, which is likely not what the patrons had in mind, but is rather nice for us. Part 8, in which the Enlightenment thinkers occasionally notice their dogs. The Enlightenment brought about great leaps in philosophy, politics, and the sciences, though for the most part, dogs continued as they always had, cheerfully ignoring the debates about the rights of man. Still, some of the great minds of the era kept dogs and wrote about them with affection. Voltaire, for instance, reportedly preferred the company of his dogs to that of most people, which might have been a compliment to the dogs, or a criticism of people, or both. Breeding took another step forward at this time, becoming more deliberate and more recorded. Wealthy landowners kept detailed notes on the lineage of their hunting hounds, pairing them for speed, scenting ability, or endurance. This was not yet modern dog breeding, no glossy kennel club standards, but it was moving in that direction. The average working dog, however, lived a life much like its medieval predecessors. They herded sheep, guarded property, and walked alongside carts on muddy roads. Enlightenment or not, a dog's main concern was still whether it could find something to eat and a dry place to sleep. If that happened to be next to a philosopher musing about the nature of the soul, so much the better. Part 9, in which the Industrial Revolution changes a dog's working day. The Industrial Revolution was an age of steam, smoke, and machinery, and dogs, as usual, adapted without asking too many questions. In cities, some were harnessed to small carts, delivering milk, bread, or even coal. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and for some, it probably meant more regular meals than their rural cousins got. Urban stray populations grew alongside human ones, prompting new laws about dog ownership and control. There were licensing schemes, leash regulations, and the occasional public grumble about the dog problem, which suggests that people had not yet discovered the modern trick of turning any grievance into a cheerful local news segment. In the countryside, working dogs continued their age-old tasks, though now they sometimes competed with machines. Sheepdogs remained indispensable. No engine, however clever, could look a ewe in the eye and convince it to move in quite the right direction. The relationship between people and dogs was changing. In some cases, becoming more formal and structured. In others, remaining entirely practical. Part 10, in which Queen Victoria makes small dogs fashionable. If history has a knack for anything, it's for letting royalty set trends that the rest of society promptly tries to copy, even if those trends are mildly impractical. Queen Victoria adored dogs, not in a vague, I suppose they're nice sort of way, but with an enthusiasm that saw her surrounded by them for most of her life. Collies, spaniels, dachshunds, and particularly Pomeranians, the smaller and fluffier the better, trotted through the palace halls and across manicured lawns. Their influence was remarkable. In the 1800s, if Queen Victoria had a particular dog, the upper classes wanted one too. It wasn't long before the middle classes followed, and breeders found themselves producing more of these small, decorative companions to meet the demand. Victoria herself is credited with popularizing the smaller variety of Pomeranian after bringing some back from Italy. These were not the fox-sized dogs of their earlier ancestry, but compact fluff balls that could be carried without the need for a footman. The Queen's dogs lived better than most humans of the time. They had attendants, tailored bedding, and an unspoken immunity from the rules that governed everyone else in the palace. In her journals, Victoria sometimes mentioned her dogs by name, not just as passing references, but in the same tone one might use to write about close friends. It's entirely possible that some palace guests felt the dogs were treated with more warmth than they were. Of course, the spread of small companion dogs wasn't universal. Many working-class families still kept dogs for more practical reasons: guarding, herding, hunting, and would have found the idea of a dog that couldn't catch a rat, or at least bark at the postman, faintly absurd. But in the drawing rooms of the Victorian elite, the idea of the pet dog as a family member was firmly established, and it wasn't going anywhere. Part 11, in which the Kennel Club and the Dog Show arrive. By the mid-19th century, the British had formalized almost everything. Rail timetables, postal delivery, and, inevitably, dogs. The Kennel Club was founded in 1873, not because dogs had been causing administrative chaos, but because dog enthusiasts wanted order, rules, and above all, competitions. The idea of the dog show had already been around for years, but now it was official. The first shows judged dogs primarily on appearance: the shape of the ears, the length of the coat, the way the animal carried itself. This must have been a curious experience for dogs used to being valued for actual skills. Imagine a sheepdog, accustomed to a day's work in the hills, being told its ears were a bit too rounded to win a ribbon. Yet people flocked to these events, proud to parade their dogs, and, in many cases, themselves. Dog shows quickly became social occasions. They weren't just about the animals. They were about hats, gloves, and the subtle art of being seen in the right company. There were rivalries, whispered criticisms, and the occasional scandal when a dog's lineage was questioned. It turns out that even in the genteel world of competitive grooming, human competitiveness could be as fierce as a terrier after a mouse. From these early shows came the modern concept of the breed standard, written descriptions of exactly how each breed should look and behave. Whether the dogs themselves appreciated this precision is unclear, but their owners took it very seriously indeed. For some, this was the high point of dog ownership, the chance to display a perfectly brushed coat under the judging eye of someone who had, quite possibly, never spent a day mucking about in the rain with a real working dog. Part 12, in which the leash becomes a thing. The leash, or lead, depending on your geography, has existed in some form for thousands of years, but its journey from necessity to everyday pet accessory is worth a slow look. Ancient Egyptian art shows dogs on what appeared to be leads, often in the hands of noblemen. These were as much about status as control, a way of showing off a prized animal in public without letting it run off to investigate something smelly. For centuries, leads were practical tools for hunters, traders, and city dwellers who didn't want their dogs bolting into traffic. They were often made of rope, leather, or anything to hand. The dog had no say in the matter, although many probably saw it as an affront to their natural right to chase whatever they fancied. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, as dogs became more common in urban settings, the leash became an essential part of the respectable dog owner's kit. Laws in many cities required dogs to be restrained in public, which no doubt caused consternation among owners of particularly stubborn breeds. The modern retractable leash, that curious device that allows a dog to believe it's free until it hits the end with a sharp jolt, didn't appear until the late 20th century. Dogs, for their part, seem largely unimpressed by this innovation. Part 13, in which the world goes to the dogs in uniform. The First and Second World Wars turned dogs into soldiers of a sort. They carried messages, detected mines, and located the wounded. Some pulled carts of ammunition or supplies. The military valued their reliability, and the fact they didn't complain about the food, although the food was often better than what many human soldiers were getting. Stories from the front tell of dogs navigating shell-torn landscapes to deliver vital communications. Others acted as mascots for entire units, their presence a reminder of home in the midst of chaos. Some even earned medals for bravery, although what they made of such awards is anyone's guess. Most likely, they were more interested in whether the medal came with something edible. After the wars, some of these dogs were sent home with their handlers, while others stayed with new units or communities. The bond, forged in such extreme circumstances, was not easily broken. It's a reminder that while humans have often taken dogs into their service, dogs have, in their own way, been serving us all along, sometimes in jobs they never signed up for. Part 14, in which we name the dogs, and sometimes regret it. From the moment humans began keeping dogs, they began naming them, often with alarming lack of imagination. The Romans had names like Fido, meaning I am faithful, or Lupa, meaning she-wolf, while medieval farmers might simply call a dog Spot, Brown, or that one. It was efficient, if nothing else. As dogs moved further into the realm of companionship, names became more playful and occasionally baffling. The Victorians favored names like Dash, Floss, or Jip. In the 20th century, film and television created surges in certain names. Lassie, Rin Tin Tin, Benji. Some owners named their dogs after historical figures, which can be awkward when you have to shout Napoleon across a busy park. Today, the variety is endless. some names are chosen for comedy, others for sentiment, and a few because the dog looked like a certain name, a logic that falls apart the moment you meet a Chihuahua named Thor. It is perhaps the clearest example of how we project our personalities onto our dogs, whether they like it or not. I, by the way, once met a person who called his dog Matt Damon only because he wanted to say the sentence, "Matt Damon just took a wee on the carpet." Part 15, in which the pet industry becomes a force of nature. By the late 20th century, the pet industry was booming in ways that would have baffled early dog owners. There were luxury dog beds, gourmet biscuits, spa treatments, and entire wardrobes of seasonal outfits. What began as a way to feed and house an animal had become a multi-billion-dollar global market. Some of this was, of course, driven by genuine care, better nutrition, veterinary advances, and enrichment toys designed to keep dogs mentally stimulated. Some of it, however, was driven by the simple human joy of buying things for a creature that cannot protest. Dogs were photographed professionally, given birthday parties, and, in the age of social media, turned into influencers with more followers than their owners. And yet, beneath all the frills and branding, working dogs still carried out their ancient roles, herding sheep, guarding homes, finding lost hikers, and standing patiently by while humans congratulated themselves on how well they were cared for. Part 16, in which we pass strange laws about dogs. Over the centuries, humans have passed some truly peculiar laws about dogs. In medieval England, for example, peasants were forbidden to keep hunting dogs tall enough to reach a deer's back. In the 1800s, several European cities introduced dog taxes, requiring owners to pay for the privilege of keeping a dog. This led, inevitably, to people trying to disguise their dogs as other animals to avoid the fee, a strategy that rarely worked unless the tax collector was exceptionally short-sighted. Modern laws are less brutal, but still occasionally eccentric. Some towns have bans on dogs barking after a certain hour, as though the dogs could read the municipal code. Others have leash laws so specific you'd think they were drafted with one particular stubborn terrier in mind. Part 17, in which dogs enter the world of work. While dogs had always worked, the late 20th century saw the rise of the professional service dog. Guide dogs for the visually impaired, hearing dogs, and mobility assistance dogs transformed the lives of their handlers. Trained from puppyhood, these animals learned complex skills, from navigating traffic to fetching dropped items with an accuracy and reliability that would shame most humans attempting the same tasks. Therapy dogs began visiting hospitals, schools, and care homes, their calm presence providing comfort in difficult circumstances. Police and military working dogs took on specialized roles in detection and search and rescue. These jobs were not ceremonial, they were vital, and the dogs performed them with the same quiet diligence they had shown since the first campfires. It's a reminder that even in a world of gadgets and automation, there are things only a dog can do, or will do, simply because we asked them to. Part 18, in which science takes an interest. By the turn of the 21st century, dogs had caught the attention of geneticists, behaviorists, and anthropologists. Studies explored everything, from the origins of domestication to the intricacies of canine communication. It turned out that dogs were astonishingly good at reading human body language, better, in fact, than our closest primate relatives. breeding programs became more scientifically managed, though not without controversy. Concerns over inherited health problems led to debates about ethics and the need to balance appearance with welfare. Some breeds were celebrated for their resilience. Others were quietly retired from show standards that demanded unhealthy extremes. For the dogs, of course, none of this mattered. They continued to live in the present moment, unconcerned with academic papers or breeding registries, more interested in whether it was time for dinner. Part 19, in which dogs take over the internet. Social media created a new kind of celebrity, the dog influencer. From photogenic pugs in costumes to border collies performing elaborate tricks, millions of followers tuned in daily to see what the dog was up to, which was often exactly what it had been up to the day before. Some of these canine stars earned serious income through sponsorships and merchandise. Others simply brought joy to people who needed a moment of distraction. For the dogs, the main difference was the number of times they were asked to sit still while someone adjusted the lighting. It's unlikely the first campfire wolves could have imagined this outcome, but then again, perhaps the whole point of domestication was to see how far humans could be trained. Part 20, in which famous people refuse to be separated from their dogs. Throughout history, many notable figures have had dogs that were almost as well known as their owners. Napoleon Bonaparte's wife Josephine had a pug named Fortune, who famously bit the emperor on their wedding night, a sign, perhaps, of things to come. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, the poet, was so devoted to her spaniel Lush that she wrote poems about him, and he received his own biography from Virginia Woolf. Flush, it must be said, was an unusually well-connected dog. Winston Churchill kept a series of poodles, all named Rufus. One was once barred from entering a cinema with him, prompting Churchill to tell the usher, "If Rufus can't go in, neither can I." This may have been admirable loyalty, or a clever excuse to avoid a dull film. Pablo Picasso had a dachshund named Lump, who appears in several of his artworks, often in a way that makes it hard to tell if the dog was posing or simply happened to be in the way. In America, Franklin D. Roosevelt's Scottish Terrier, Bala, was so popular he received thousands of letters from admirers and was mentioned in presidential speeches. More recently, Queen Elizabeth II became almost synonymous with her corgis, each with its own name, personality, and place in palace life. These dogs were not mere accessories. They were companions, confidants, and, in some cases, minor celebrities in their own right. What these stories show is that no matter how powerful, talented, or historically significant a person may be, they are often happiest in the company of a dog who neither knows nor cares about their fame. For the dog, the human is not a monarch, a president, or a genius. They're simply the one who opens the biscuit tin. Part 21, in which we wonder how much dogs really love us. For centuries, humans have taken it as an article of faith that dogs love us. We've written poems about it, painted portraits of it, and built entire industries around the idea. But science, ever determined to poke at our certainties, has tried to measure it. Studies have found that when a dog looks at its human, both experience a rise in oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, in much the same way a parent and child do. Brain imaging has revealed that familiar human scents light up a dog's pleasure centers, and experiments show that most dogs will choose their owner's company over food, though one suspects this depends heavily on the quality of the food. Behaviorists point to the way dogs seek eye contact, follow us from room to room, and lean against us as signs of genuine affection. It is, perhaps, one of the few areas in science where the data mostly confirms what we already hoped was true. Of course, dogs are also opportunists. They've evolved alongside us for thousands of years, and it would be naive to ignore the fact that our companionship comes with warmth, shelter, and regular meals. But anyone who has had a dog greet them after a long absence, tail wagging, body wriggling, as though you'd returned from conquering a continent, will find it hard to believe it's all about resources. The truth may be that love, in the human sense, is complicated to measure in a dog. But whatever it is, loyalty, affection, a mutual shaping of two species over millennia, it's enough to make us keep each other's company from the first campfire to the present day. 22, in which our story closes. Today, dogs live in almost every part of the world. They work in search and rescue teams, guard blocks on windswept hills, and sleep under cafe tables in crowded cities. They attend weddings, star in films, and in some homes have their own wardrobes. The path from wolf to sofa companion has been long and winding, shaped by human needs, whims, and affections, and by the dog's endless adaptability. Not every dog lives a perfect life, but as a species, they have mastered the art of fitting themselves into ours. From the edge of the firelight to the edge of the bed, dogs have been watching us for thousands of years. And if history is any guide, they'll keep doing it, occasionally wondering, in whatever way a dog wonders, why you still haven't opened that cupboard.